Part of my obsession with cinema would be in the way I realised that I wasn't just the same as my friends, is that we would all go and watch, you know, a film, Lethal Weapon, but I would also go and watch the new Woody Allen film and art house cinema films on my own, and they never wanted to come to those. So my love of cinema has been really very wide. I think when I was younger, American films would have been my, you know, the thing I would have enjoyed the most easily, you know, Star Wars, Spielberg. And when I was very young, before we had a video, that would be me staying up late to watch, you know, movies that were on television. And, you know, there was lots of Hammer movies like Curse of the Werewolf. But I also liked the deeper, darker films that made you think. So yeah, I think that kind of shows in the eclectic nature of the films I've made, which are primarily in the genre mode, but often they go off at these dark tangents. I try to make all my films as commercial as possible, but I find that they go off at other little tangents, the same way my brain does, in a way. You look at like Black Death versus Severance, in a weird way, there's elements of both of them in those films. One is more serious, obviously, but there's a sort of glee in the cruelty of some of them, like a sense of humour to it. But there's also, it plays, you know, the tragedy of it is also there. I'm not doing it in a splatter kind of slasher way. If you look at it in detail, there are moments where it's asking you to laugh, but then it's also saying, look, these are clearly war crimes, and making you think about the war crimes by shooting it in a way that stops being funny, deliberately. I'm conscious of that, you know, I'm conscious of politics.
Stop! What are you doing? Don't move. The place is mine. The whole place is mine.
How do you know?
I'm standing on one.
Oh, shit.
My wife's always begging me to make films like Severance or, you know, Get Santa. It's like, stop making these weird time structure films. But they don't feel weird to me. They make complete sense to me. I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, like late in life, which explains so much to me. And they gave me this medication that I can take where I can suddenly write a script and sit there and go, and actually sit and focus rather than doing 15 things at once. I do think that there's something in that, in my own psychology, that makes my brain go off at a tangent, so that these stories that kind of start at the end and go back to the beginning, it kind of makes sense. Because in the process of writing, which is a very stationary, solitary thing, I kind of go off at tangents in my brain that entertain myself. You know, you look at the Coen brothers movies, the way they write, I've since discovered, is similar to how I used to write. I would sit there and go, I've got a great idea for a film, a girl gets trapped in the underground, but I wouldn't go through the discipline of writing a treatment before I did it. Because I couldn't wait to get started because I'm so impulsive. But then you do end up with this clever kind of stuff that starts to happen. But of course, none of it works, so that you then have to go into it again and again, rather than taking the pain up front and planning it, which is what I try to do now. You know, I try to sort of do loads of prep before I write, because the writing process is so much quicker then. So I've kind of learned on the job the way to do it, yeah. The way I got from Creep, my first film, to Severance was, you know, one review had said something, you know, about it warranted, you know, it needed some humor in Creep or something. It took itself too seriously or something, and that really annoyed me. There's just one review, and I was like, fuck you, I can do comedy. So I just decided I'd make a really funny movie. And so when you actually look at Creep versus Severance, stylistically, Creep is more stylish, but it was because my attention was just on that thing, just on making it really well acted, really funny. And so then I did Triangle, which was a film which kind of very Kubricky in my kind of construction of it. You know, 2001 is the greatest movie of all time. The more I watch it, the more I think so. And I love the very deliberate structure. So I was, because of the story on that one, I was tied into this structure. I had no choice but to storyboard it all so that the crew could understand what the story was, which in my head was simple, but it is like a whirlpool. It just goes in on itself. And so having boards so that people could understand that you can follow this story in a very classically directed way, always knowing which Jess you're with, otherwise the world would kind of collapse. So that's, you know, how those three were structured, really. And then into the fourth one, Black Death, where I felt so constricted by the form of making Triangle that I wanted to not do that with the new one. So it was a conscious choice to not have to do it like very ordered camera moves, cranes, tracks, but to free it up, mixed with a desire to not make it look like a costume drama from England. You know, and I thought, what's the most way I can not make this look like a British costume drama, a bad British costume drama? Well, get it off the track first and get it off the crane and make it all handheld like it's a war journalist, and we'll shoot it on 16mm. It was kind of a reaction to the film before in some ways. And now what I do is I'm much more able to sort of kind of do all of it at once, so I can now go, right, I know how to make it funny, I still want it to look nice, so I'll give it these lenses and but I've sort of got driven towards wide angle lenses, as I was discussing with you guys before, because I find that there's a real discipline in directing with a format that doesn't allow you to do anything, and that sometimes, you know, looking at Ridley Scott's recent film, I watched all of his recent movies, he has so many cameras, and he was on stage talking about the new Gladiator, and he shot it in 51 days. That's great that you can do it such a big movie so quickly, but I feel like the more cameras you have, the less deliberate choice you have to make, and I feel like better filmmaking comes from those restrictions and those kind of, what's the perfect shot to tell the story. And I now like to work from the belief of what's the least number of shots I can use to sell this perfectly, and then add in what I need with that, you know. So the action sequences now, I would rather do a kind of Saving Private Ryan, and if you watch that opening, it's actually lots of long takes. It's not cut, 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 cut. You think it is, but it's not. And I think that's much more interesting, to put someone in time within a scene rather than chop, 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 chop. That way works too, but it's different in a way. There's a balance for a filmmaker between just making the audience think about you. A lot of directors, you know, you'll see, I think Joe Wright does it in the Atonement. I think the worst part of Atonement is that big long shot in the middle. It's utterly pointless. But it's just about, look what a clever person I am. And I think it takes away from the film. Listen, he's doing much better than I am, so he knows something I don't. Maybe I should do more of that. But I try to not make you think about the filmmaker. But like, there's shots in Detour, for example, where he looks in the mirror and he's saying, I can't fucking believe I killed this guy. And then the camera follows him. It goes left, it goes right, and you see him. I think those things are nice. I got very into kind of watching kind of like Tarkovsky and films like Ulysses Gaze, long films that deal with keeping you in the moment. I think they make you, in the right environment, because they make you think about the psychology of the character, because of the nausea that it creates on you. I think to play a trick on the audience and to make them feel like something's happened, I think they have to understand that they've seen it for real. And I think that's what Tom Cruise understands, is that there's a pleasure knowing the stunt was for real, because you get the pleasure in the cinema of, showing the technique. And I think film has got to that stage. It's that balance between when you're used to watching an old James Bond movie, you knew it wasn't Roger Moore jumping out of the airplane, but you knew it was a stuntman who was doing this crazy stunt where two men are fighting in the sky. It really was two guys who were jumping out of an airplane, pretending to be James Bond. If you look at any of those Supermans, those DC Supermans, you hand over to the VFX department and you have this pretend Superman just flying through walls. There's something really unengaging about that. So I think for the story, I think one, you want to do a sleight of hand, like a magic trick, before you show it. So I was keen to do that. to show that she has traveled through the mirror. You don't know what's happened, but something imperceptible has happened. And that shot was lovely because we pulled the set apart and did it in the old-fashioned way that, you know, she had a double on her back, and you're on the back of a double, and the real Melissa's on the other side of the mirror. So that was partly to do with showing her going through the loop, carrying the audience through the loop, and not just using cuts. And then at the end, you know, the idea of is the sort of end, if you like, of her death. It's kind of like the way you view that is she died in the crash, or did she? I wanted the car crash to feel deliberately stylized and unreal, not feel real, put it into a track, make it feel dreamy, you know, and force the audience to know that something has happened so they can think about it. It's a bit like the Jean-Luc Godard film Weekend. It's kind of, that was kind of the style. They had that big tracking shot in that went on for hours. I got the idea from the myth of Sisyphus, the idea that you push a thing up a mountain only to see it roll back down, that she's a mother trapped in a loop with her child of guilt, and I wanted you to get this idea that she can never break this loop, that she is in this purgatory.
You're not me.
And the way, you know, if you want to read it in a ghost-like way, you read it as though her guilt lived on and she will carry on seeing that until she breaks the loop. But of course she never can, because she always falls asleep on the boat and wakes up and doesn't remember where she was, which is your clue really that it's going to be one of those films.
You all right?
I feel like I know this place.
We shot it in Australia and it has that effect. We shot a lot of it, obviously, like all DOPs, you want low light, you want the light rear lit. And so, but he's let it bleed out a bit, and it creates, it kind of helps you sometimes. We were filming, you know, the sailing scenes. We had to remove the backgrounds a lot because they wouldn't let us go sailing too far out. So we would find a lagoon where you were with a bay. So then you could see land, so then we had to take the land out. So I think what happened was we started to realize that we're better off pushing it a bit to make those easier to remove if you need to. In fact, if you look on the IMDb, there's a shot which for some unknown reason they've left in, which was a still that a stills photographer had taken. And you can see the land behind, and it was a still, and you're like, guys, remove the land. And they hadn't, and it shows you really how close we were to the shore when we were doing some of it. But yeah, I mean, it was a painful film for me because it was, you know, I'd lost my dad not long before. I was in Australia. There were many fights going on with the budget because we were so over. And then my usual producer wasn't around because he'd had a family issue. So I found myself getting a little bit smacked between the kind of financiers a bit, but I held my own, but it was exhausting, that film. So I'm glad it found an audience in the end, because it didn't when it first came out. It's really annoying. It was like, I knew it was good, and it was like, they didn't quite market it right. They tried to market it like a normal slasher. And I think they should have pushed into the weird more and the interesting more. You know, VFX set extensions are great. And obviously this was 15 years ago. I think as soon as you start doing something real, like the sea, you know, it's very, you have that kind of uncanny valley feeling that it's not right. And I think what they did, which I'm not sure was driven by budget or what they felt was right, was that they pushed it slightly into the old-fashioned oddness rather than making it feel real. It almost feels kind of deliberate. It feels deliberate. I'm not saying it kind of wasn't. It was kind of a mixture of things. And we reached a happy, okay, that's that. You know, there's certain bits that are really good. The storm, I think, works, and there are areas like the multiple bodies. really wanted to be by the sea and not be in a studio. And that is inexperience, but it was kind of right in a weird way as well, because we built the ship on the edge of a jetty. We spent a lot of money on it, so that you really are by the sea. So if you look at movies like Death Ship, you really feel like you're in a studio. And I really don't like films when you feel like you're in a studio.
Stay down.
Elements of Saving Private Ryan that we were just talking about, there's elements where it looks like a Belgian village or something. But to me, it looks like the set from Ratatouille. It's kind of like, I mean, it's worse for you guys when you see it. And that's a brilliant film, but there are moments, there's a scene where the family are in the half bombed out house, and it just feels built to me, as good as it was. And again, because of the fantastical nature of the film, I for some unknown reason felt it was important. And I don't know that it is important, but it was important that you really believed you were on a ship. Certainly for me and the actors. So. I realized that I liked a certain lens, that I'd kind of discovered that it was my first realization that if I was to make a movie entirely with wide-angle lenses, what would be the downside? I asked the DOP. He said, well, you know, you can't do over shoulders. You can't really put another camera in and shoot at the same time. These are all things that were a bonus, I felt. And so for me, it was like a learning exercise. I wanted to do it because I wanted the film to have a very big, wide-angle, epic scale to what's really quite a slight story of a family. And I felt that because of the landscapes of America, we shot most of it in South Africa and some of it in Vegas, it would lend itself to that. And to have a kind of, that epic neo-noir feel that you would get in those movies in the 90s where they were making noirs, to try and create a world also that would have a Hitchcock feel. And it came from Triangle in a way, to not hide in the shadows, but to have it very bright and clean and very everyday. But to make it feel slightly artificial as well, in a way. In a way like The Birds is artificial. And then that film educated me and taught me of the restrictions, but also it really forced me to think. Because I have a tendency to enjoy the kind of chaos of shooting on the day and just shooting from the hip. And one of the things that young filmmakers definitely don't anticipate, and critics definitely, most of them, certainly the good ones do, but the poor ones don't. They assume that everybody gets the same working practice as Stanley Kubrick does. Like these mistakes you see are as a result of the lack of your talent. In actual fact, the mistakes you see are often budget related, or the fact that you have to shoot out that day. And some directors who have very much followed a storyboard, once they know the day's rained off, they are unable to reimagine what they have to do, the compromise they have to make. And I'm not criticizing others, because some of the most austere directors who are very formal are my favorite ones. But sometimes you have to throw it away and go, we're going to do it differently, certainly on lower budgets. And so when I've done TV recently, some bigger budget TV, I think they all think the film directors are going to be really slow. But in actual fact, we're much quicker than a lot of the TV directors, because we're not used to having the infrastructure of, well, we're doing a 70-day shoot on TV. We'll just nick a day. You'll have to just lose a day from episode 5 or something. Whereas what we have is you've got 35 days, and every day is completely accounted for. And with a film like Triangle, for example, you cannot not shoot something, because it's all shot out of order. You can't miss that bit. That bit means that this bit to that bit won't work. It's not like you can do it in a cut like you can a drama. It has to be there.
You choose in Detour to frame the action not on the center. It's always been...
Yeah, I do on that one. I've kind of changed a little bit now. I kind of like more central. I tell you what I saw the other day. I saw Silence of the Lambs again, and I never understood just how brilliant Jonathan Demme's close-ups are. And he does this, and I noticed that I was doing that just instinctively a lot in Black Death, and not at all in very little in that one. And it's partly because of the lens choices. And when you do go central in Detour, like when he's looking in the mirror, it distorts, and it quite distorts the face. And I like it though. I like the kind of the thing it does, the fisheye effect. But there again, I don't like the fisheye effect in, you know, The Favourite and stuff. I just fuck, you know. So for me, it's a very fine line between the director's indulgences and the audience. And so what I guess I'm saying is a lot of what I've learned has come out of ambition and films that I love, but also learning on the job. You know, when you speak to, like, you interview with people like Ridley Scott or any of those real old guns that have been around forever, they are all about, you know, why did you shoot that way? And they'll be like, oh, because we couldn't afford the film we needed, so we, you know, they've never got an artsy answer. They've become so stripped away to that's all we could afford that day. And I find that sometimes there's truth in that you actually have to deal with what you have on the day. When I got the script, it was going to be made by another director, and the first 2/3 of it were almost identical. So I was reading it as though it was all real. I'd already invested in this. Oh wow, this is great. This is like, this is all fake. She's not really real. That's so interesting. A false icon, a false deity. And then in the original, it was all, literally the earth opened and there was the devil and they were the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I was just, oh, whoa. Like, what is this rubbish? No. And so I went for the meeting and I didn't realize that, because, you know, you don't think it when you're younger. You're kind of, that actually these producers had lost their director because he left the project having a row with them and gone on to do something else. And their project would fold if they didn't find a director. And I didn't realize there was a list of horror directors. It was probably me, Neil Marshall, probably Edgar Wright. That was it. And those 2 weren't available probably. And I was like, so I didn't realize, but anything I would have said, they would have said yes to. And I just said, look, I want to do it, but I want it all to be real. And I want to have it like, make it about society and utopias. And so we just got into like a writer's room and we just thought up the way we could end it. And so all of the stuff, like, and it wasn't that I wrote it, I did a pass on the script where I just started to throw things out with a view to sort of following almost an Apocalypse Now structure of, you know, there's a moment where he says, never leave the cart again. It's like, never get out of the boat. It's kind of, there are these little things. And then obviously at the end, he needs to believe a miracle and she needs to keep the village, the witch needs to have the village in check through her power. So she needs to show miracles. And so it's kind of almost like a autocrat. It's almost like a, you know, a little dictator in the village and having to kill the subjects. And so all of the stuff with the knife, with Eddie, with the knife, that all came out later. And then I just became obsessed that it has to be about fundamentalism and what's the worst thing that can happen to this young boy who basically is a liberal by their standards, but he's a man of God. He just wants to be married. He just wants the modern version of faith in a way. So we turn him into like a terrorist in the end. And I love the end. It's so dark. You know, the kind of, some say that he'd done this and some say that he'd done that. Yeah. But the financiers, funnily enough, who'd put money in, they hadn't really read the new drafts. So they just assumed, they put the money in, that we were making this massive, like, you know, lightning and devils and demons, people bursting out of, and all they had instead was the kind of Tarkovsky reeds blowing. And it was John's voiceover going like, some say he fought a battle that day, you know, and it all got very Terence Malick. And it was just like, and in the premiere, they loved it. And the audience clapped and they're like, what happened to the monsters? And yeah. You didn't read the script, did you? It's like,
Amen.
Amen.
I expected grace, not the entire Lord's Prayer.
I'm not interested in supernatural. It's like, which is odd to admit because I've made some films that are supernatural, but that doesn't scare me. I think I'm more scared of real things, real, you know, fundamentalists and crazy people that walk into shopping malls with, you know, death on their mind. That scares me more than any witch.
Once again, in Black Death, you just playing with the structure. You think the narrator of the film is Eddie Redmayne.
Yeah, I know, it's nice that, and it's John. I know, I love that. Yeah. Again, that came about. Partly we were fixing the edit. We wanted to explain a little bit about where we were. And then, yeah, the fumes of the dead hung in the air like poison. I think I wrote that on a plane with about 6 gin and tonics on board with my editor who's coming over, and we're both thinking like we're like U2 or something. We've come up with this amazing lyric. And we're like, whoa. So it was quite good fun making that film because we shot it very much, as you can see, it's shot with, you know, very much, there's 2 cameras permanently running film, you know, just churning film. With me running around going, okay, and we shot it in order, which is also very rare and a real luxury. The only downside of shooting in order is obviously you're not at your best in the first week and you're always rushing at the end. So I think we did a 16 or 17 hour day and shot the whole epilogue from the burning and everything in a day. So the torture when she gets her foot cut off, and them riding into town, and burning the witch, and collecting the girl. I think it was a day and a half, so we shot the whole epilogue. And I wasn't very popular with the crew that day, but yeah. So yeah, and so it was made in the edit a lot. You know, we had a plan, we knew what we were doing, and I think we had mostly 2 or 3 cameras running, and yeah. But it kind of works in a really interesting way that the fighting feels kind of fun. So the sword fight, the big sequence in the halfway point, I remember the sound designer gets the thing, and I go into the first sound, you know, review, and he's got this, it sounds like Kill Bill. I was like, no, you know what I said to you? Nothing, no movie sounds. It should just be clang, 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 and kind of, but make it feel like the pictures. Don't make the sound look like it's just, you know, a Tarantino movie. Make it feel cheap in a way, and then it feels more brutal because it feels more real. Nuns, for some reason, have to be sexy. I've never found them sexy, so when I make a film with nuns in it, I don't make it sexy. I actually look at them like they're people that are very driven by one set of ideas, and I find that kind of fundamentalism, whatever group you're in, interesting. And not just from a sort of non-religious perspective, because I said yesterday, I was chatting to someone that, you know, that you can be as pathological as an atheist as you are as any religious group. You can, it's these tribes that I find odd, that scare me. So nuns scare me. They don't titillate me. You know, I want to make them, because they have conviction, and people that have a very clear conviction, they can be the ones that can be led into the dark holes, I think.
There is but one God.
And his shadow.
You know, so a big influence for me with Consecration was, people ask, what films do you like? What nun movies do you like? I liked you know, like Agnes of God. It's not a horror movie. It's Jane Fonda. A young nun, has a child that she leaves in a drawer, dead, and she's the sweetest girl, but she's given birth to a child overnight. She's left it to die. It died, and then she says that Jesus got her pregnant, made her pregnant, and obviously, when the atheist detective turns up, she knows obviously this girl's been raped, who's raped her, and they never quite resolve it. It's from a play, and you're left with this, was it a miracle? In which case, yeah. And I think when you leave the brain to work, I think it gets scarier, I think. Films that put you to sleep in the cinema and then keep you up at night when you get home, you know? I kind of like to play with that space a bit.
Oh, it's so lovely, it's so blue, yellow, black wings, brown, blood. No. His blood.
It's like adults are unable to translate material anymore, it's like. We have to make everything really silly to make it possible. If you watch One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest, Jack Nicholson says, well, she was 15 going on 30, if you know what I mean. And you go, well, yeah, I know what you mean, that's fucking terrible, but everyone still roots for him. everyone is able to make their own judgment of him and still accept him as a character. And I think we've gone to this strange place now where everything has to be really black or white. And I think in the grey areas are where the great films, the kind of the dread lurks in the bits that are a bit wrong. Abel Ferrara being the master of that kind of world of sleaze. So I've always been drawn to like films like Ferrara's films because he never quite gets it fully perfect. He lets it kind of seep into, you know, if you know what I mean. Like the nun scene in Bad Lieutenant it's just horrendous. And the idea that she has forgiven them for their sins is amazing.
Don't you want this crime revenged?
With Consecration, we tried to get Meg Tilly to play the nun, and she sort of dropped out of acting. But Meg Tilly, not only beautiful, but she's like, in Agnes of God, she's so sweet that she's killed a child, but you don't in any way blame her. And so the young nun that plays the really simple girl, the fang girl, you know, the one that comes up and says, "I've cleaned your clothes for you." We've based her very much on the Meg Tilly character.
We must forsake our own evil or be devoured. Meg, let the badness out.
It's about a pureness that can be corrupted is what's interesting. And funny enough, the Black Death became a very, very, very popular film, bizarrely in the prison system of the UK. They have like a top 10 for rentals, and it was #1 for like a year. And it became a news story. And it's because I think the prisoners all can see that they were young and pure once, and this was put on me. It's not entirely my fault, is what they take comfort from. And that's true. It's not entirely your fault. So yeah, in a weird way, it's a big hit with prisoners, with murderers and killers. So yeah.
Is it true that you were influenced by Paul Schrader's book about transcendantal cinema?
Yeah, I had this is going to make all of you, I can tell you're all complete movie, like myself, movie geeks. I was in Sitges, and I was friends with one of the main people there. And she goes, what are you doing tonight? And I said, I'm going out with you, I think, as you're about to invite me out. She goes, I'm going out with Paul Schrader and Christopher Walken. Would you like to come? I was like, no, I'm I said, yeah, I'd like to come. So it was me, her, Paul Schrader and his wife, and Christopher Walken and his wife. His wife's hilarious, and she's an agent from the old style Jewish kind of agent. Like, she put him in the Woody Allen film. She cast all Woody Allen films. I mean, I was dead, and I'd come to heaven. And then I sort of find myself, sort of sitting next to Schrader. I only said a few like back and forths to Christopher Walken because I was just too sort of nervous to be around him, and that he really does speak like that. It's really it's hard for me not to impersonate him. But then Schrader starts to talk, and he's got apparently a new. I haven't seen the new edition, but he's released a new edition to the book. I haven't read it yet. And we were talking about Dreyer and Pasolini, and there's something in those images that feel divine. They feel like, and it's trying to catch that. And I think the kind of more successful moments of any of the religious films I've done, certainly, slightly more problematic films that were harder to sort of make through my prism. So the Banishing, for example, was written in a way that I couldn't make. I just can't do that the way it is. Again, like Black Death. And it probably had a less successful transition into the way I wanted it to be, but what it has very well are images that feel like the images of the multiple Jesses stood behind her on the wall. It comes from images that I discovered from religious, basically like asylums for women, broken, like now they would just be people with PTSD or abuse victims. But back in the Victorian days, there are women that have fallen to alcohol or opium. No one's asked why, but they are wandering around basically like a cuckoo's nest environment. And this one woman used to stand on this little tiny ledge and just pick at the wall all day. And that kind of, the image of that became one of the images for that film. But I think it comes from that interest in iconography and Paul Schrader's book that made me realise that some images feel religious. And look, I love Scorsese, and I love all of Scorsese's religious movies. I mean, I love fucking Kundun as well. God, I love that film. So it's like, people think of Scorsese, they think of his gangster films, but you realise this is a guy who's obsessed. You know, he was going to be a priest. And you see that, and I'm not like that at all, but I find that religion is so interesting, it's so fascinating, and because it makes people do wonderful and fucking terrible things. And I think that's interesting, yeah. I've got 2 films coming up. One that I'm going to do straight after Christmas, which is a film called Spider Island, which is on paper a kind of comedy Severance style movie about a group of influencers that get attacked on this island by just regular aggressive spiders. So they're not massive aliens. They're kind of like in the first half of Infested, but they're all trapped without their phones, and they have to basically, what skills they have, what clothes they buy, what eye makeup they wear, how do those people, when thrown to the wolves, if you like, survive. And rather than it being just a ridicule, it starts that way, but then you realise actually they've got some real good skills, these guys. They are very clever, a lot of them. So it's kind of funny, but it has a meaning about the environment and also where we are with influencers and the dangers of it. But then I'm actually rebooting Creep, my original film as well. I want to revisit it. It's funny, I feel like I have unfinished business with that world and that environment. And I spoke to Danny Cohen, who's the DOP who shot the original and has gone on to do enormous films, you know, Oscar nominated. And as soon as I said to him, I'm thinking of, he's like, yeah, count me in. Because, you know, he feels like he's got unfinished business, and it's the space under London. It's like a microcosm of, it's not political under London, but so you can be really political. You can really say things about class and wealth, and what is a monster, and at what point should anyone be forgiven and given a second chance. And so it's going to explore that. It's like, if you do something wrong, you deserve a second chance, but society now says you don't deserve a second chance. So it's looking at the idea that, does Creep deserve a second chance? Does he require a reevaluation? And is he a victim or a killer? And so it's asking all those really difficult questions. It's going to be interesting. And it's really fucking gory and scary as well. So it's going to be good, hopefully. Fingers crossed.